You're tuned into Inside Lowell. Inside Lowell podcast brought to you in part by Washington Savings Bank, serving the greater Lowell community for over 130 years. Make the switch now to Washington Savings Bank. 𝐖𝐞𝐥𝐥𝐸, offering a variety of plans for people insured under the GIC. At 𝐖𝐞𝐥𝐥𝐸, your health is their top priority. Boston North Company, offering a wide variety of business solutions to help restaurant and retail clients save money. Boston North. Mahoney Oil Company, providing warmth and protection to families in Greater Lowell and Southern New Hampshire since 1925. That's Mahoney Oil. Francis E. Preventia Insurance. For auto, home, business, and life, trust the agency Greater Lowell has counted on for more than 40 years. Francis E. Preventia Insurance. GoPuff, a grocery store right at your fingertips. Use the code Lowell20 to receive $20 off your first order of $21, plus free delivery. Download the GoPuff app or visit gopuff.com today. And by the Massachusetts Pirates, bringing all the hard-hitting action and excitement of arena football to the Tsonga Center in Lowell. Get your tickets today by visiting masspiratesfootball.com. And now, time for another Inside Lowell podcast. Inside Lowell. If Lowell is your home, this is your place.
Hello again, everybody, and welcome to another Inside Lowell podcast. I am your host, Teddy Panos, coming to you from the WellPoint Studios here in beautiful, historic downtown Lowell. 𝐖𝐞𝐥𝐥𝐸 is now WellPoint. New name, same commitment to Massachusetts. At WellPoint, your whole health is their whole point. And we thank our friends at WellPoint for helping to make this podcast possible. Thank all of our sponsors here at Inside Lowell for making all of our podcasts possible, and for that matter, making all of Inside Lowell possible as well. And we thank you for joining us. One more thank you to give out, and that is to my guest on this podcast. He is now he's been the superintendent of Lowell schools for a while now, but since we last chatted, he has had that little interim title removed, and he is now just superintendent. I don't think they have a permanent superintendent title, right? It's interim or just superintendent, right?
I'm just the superintendent. Yes, Teddy. Thank you.
Lowell School Superintendent Liam Skinner, welcome. Congratulations. Good to have you here with us, and lots to talk about, because now, the interim tag is removed. So now everything is your responsibility going forward the next 3+ years, right?
That's it. Yes, it's true. Lots to talk about. Delighted to be back here, Teddy. Appreciate the opportunity to talk with you.
So, when we last chatted, we were kind of talking about your interests. You made no secret of the fact that you took the job on an interim basis, but this was something you also wanted to do going forward. You wanted to keep that job. You've been with the school system for over 3 decades. You've risen the rank. It's really kind of the kind of local success story that everybody likes to highlight. And now you've got it. So right before a school vacation, basically, the school committee said, you know what, let's forego this search process. We got the right person there. Let's put him in there. The votes were there. It happened. Soon thereafter, a contract followed. And now everything is wonderful in your world, right? You've got security, you've got some guarantees. Now you can just coast from here.
Well, now I've got a lot of hard work to do, Teddy, a lot of challenges ahead, but I'm thrilled to be given the opportunity to tackle them. I love Lowell. Lowell has been very good to me in my career. I feel personally and professionally like I've landed in a wonderful place. I understand what's going on in our education system in our city. I understand the challenges ahead, and I feel motivated and delighted to be given the opportunity to tackle them. One
of the arguments in favor of, appointing you to the permanent position and doing it sooner rather than later, there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And if you have an interim superintendent, it's difficult to do that. The person doesn't know how long they're going to be there. Why make big changes if you're going to go in a new direction in a few months? So now that you know that this is your job for a while. What are you able to do now that you weren't able to do while you were doing the job, but only on an interim basis? Is there an example of something that you can like immediately point, go towards or point to that you maybe even if you weren't restricted by, the laws or whatever from doing it as the interim superintendent, in reality, it was politically challenging?
There probably is some nugget in there of exactly what you can do now that you couldn't do before, but it's more got to do with being able to plan and being able to set out a program of here are the priorities we're going to work on, central office. Here are the needs that we see and the needs that are, I think, are evident and obvious, and here's what we should do about them. And as an interim superintendent, that work goes into, I've got another 3 years beyond this June. And so I think it'll take all of that time, right? And so you can't be thinking ahead that far if you're an interim superintendent, being given the scope to tackle the work and to plan it out and to be accountable for it. That's what you get with the permanent superintendent tag rather than the interim.
How do you determine what the priorities are? I imagine through your 3 decades of you thought, oh, if I were the person making the call, I would do X, Y, Z or whatnot. And then, you had 9 months or so being able to do it and kind of formulating. How have you come to the decisions of, or have you come to the decisions of, all right, what's the first thing we're going to tackle? And then when that domino falls, what's next? Have you kind of made out your plan? Have you laid out a strategy for implementing your vision yet?
I'm working on it, Teddy, but I'm working on it. I guess to talk to the first question about how do you decide what the priorities are, right? You have to talk with people. You have to talk with educators in particular. You have to talk with teachers and principals, but also city officials about what we want in Lowell and what we see are the needs in Lowell. You have to talk to people. And then you've got to use data, right? In other words, you've got to point to, if I say, for example, early literacy should be a major priority, I've got to back that up. And if I say, why? Let's look at the early literacy data as compared to something else. You've got to be able to have objective reasoning and be able to help school committee and all of our community come to an understanding of why this particular item is a priority. Is there something that you want to tackle first? Have you come to kind of that decision now? And is that something we'll be seeing in the coming next school committee meeting or coming weeks, et cetera? So let's say to be specific, because I think I'm going to drive you crazy here and your viewers with a little bit general. There's a lot of generalities. I'd like to talk about continuous improvement. I'd like to talk about early childhood learning and so on. But more specifically, we are going to have a central office reorganization. We've talked about this before. We talked about that, for example, the most common concern of the school committee being no Office of Student Support Services. And so that's something that's coming down the pike relatively soon. We'll be tackling that. We'll be talking about it with the committee. And it might have some implications for our budget season as well.
Okay, so reorganization. And in your last appearance here, folks want to go back and watch that podcast. You talked a little bit about that. I asked you point blank, do you think the administration is top heavy? And why you didn't say those words, you did use reorganization. Now, reorganization can mean a couple of different things. It could also mean an expansion of central administration. Is that in play here? Or do you believe that there are enough people there currently to do what you want to do with the schools?
An expansion is not, in my view. By the way, there's a company working on this with us. They're called Public Works. They've come to town and interviewed folks. They've looked at all of our organizational charts and our data, and they have yet to issue a report. So much of what I'm saying depends a lot on what they decide and what they report out on us. I do not anticipate an expansion of central office. To answer your question more directly, I think we've got plenty of people to do the work.
Okay. Do you anticipate a reduction and a reallocation of those resources into other areas, specifically in the classroom, whether it's aides, teachers, other services, mental health services, et cetera?
Yeah, I don't have enough information on that yet, Teddy. I couldn't say, right? And when we see that report, it'll be very interesting to see what the folks in Public Works recommend.
Okay. And you mentioned that it might have some budget implications there. The school budgets, they never decrease, right? And basically what you kind of spend one year, that's your starting point for the next year. And I believe that's by law, right? That's by Massachusetts statute, correct? And I'm saying that for folks who are listening to this saying, well, he's talking about a reorganization. Why doesn't he cut and give the money back to the taxpayers? Doesn't work that way with schools by statute, right?
It doesn't work that way. We have to abide by what's called net school spending. So the state comes out with a figure that we have to meet. In other words, we have to spend that amount on our education.
Okay. But that said, is it possible that we won't see a major expansion? And this is not to criticize your predecessor, but he made significant hires and expansion in central admin. And, we argued about it famously on the radio, and he justified it by saying, look, these folks provide the support to those in the classroom. So while the money isn't necessarily in the classroom, the support and the services are.
Right. So I'm sorry, Teddy. Was there a question?
so the question, I guess I'm trying to kind of get to, you said you weren't prepared yet to talk about that reorganization, but would it be fair to assume more money going into the classroom as opposed to central office?
So here's what I can tell you about it, Teddy. I promise to come back on Inside Lowell and talk in depth about the central office reorganization when we have that report and when we know where we're going with it. I don't mean to sort of be coy, but we don't have the plan yet. We don't have the report, and we haven't figured out what we're doing with it. We will receive the report, we'll share it with the committee, and ultimately the committee will help us to decide which way we should reorganize.
How much will that report influence your decision? Is it possible that you look at that report and say, nah, I've been here for forever. I've been in this job for a year. I've been in the school system forever. That's not how it works here in Lowell.
I suppose it's possible. I don't anticipate that. I think the group that came in seemed to be good at their work. They include a former superintendent. They include lots of school folks and policy folks that seem to know their job. They've certainly asked us for enough information. They have lots of plans and charts and data and so forth. I anticipate they know what they're doing and will come back with a sensible plan. It is possible, of course, this group is from Philadelphia. It's possible that they come up with ideas that are not well fitting for Lowell, but I anticipate that they'll come back with a good plan. Certainly hope to do.
All right. I think I've poked and prodded enough, and you're not going to give me any of the specifics yet, but I'll hold you to it for coming back in the future. Let's talk about the big plan, the big vision. As you look at the school system and what you would like to implement with input from this, group that's kind of coming in and helping you, do you anticipate hey, Lowell Public Schools are working pretty well, and while there might be some minor changes, a little nip and tuck here and there, we're going to keep the course? Or do you believe that the school system is in need of some kind of a redirection? And the changes we might see will be kind of taken as big changes to those who are going to be affected by them.
So I think, Teddy, that I think I'm talking about big changes, but they're not necessarily the type that you're thinking of when you ask that question. The big change, I believe, is in culture, and culture isn't something you can influence by making some quick decisions. Culture is going to take a time to shift and change. And the culture I'm referring to is what I call a culture of continuous improvement. So we have very fine educators in Lowell, but we also have significant challenges. We have very poor literacy scores, particularly at the early ages, and it's difficult to recover that as you go up if we don't tackle that. We have lots of data. But we can't yet say that we are we make data-based decisions in every case. And so we need to change the culture to a culture of continuous improvement. And by that, I mean, any new superintendent that comes into a district and makes radical shifts in a different direction, well, that'll radically shift back when the next superintendent comes in after that. I don't believe in that. I believe in developing a culture of continuous improvement. I believe in doing it collaboratively so that educators are involved and we build this thing. And so it looks like, for example, it looks like when we have a set of test scores from reading or math, we examine them closely and we decide what adjustments we need to make, and then we make adjustments. So very often we've been involved in looking at data, or better yet, analyzing data, but we're not good at saying, what change are we going to make as a result of that analysis? And that's where we need to get better at using data. It can happen on a broad scale, annual data. It can happen in every single lesson in every classroom. So that a teacher decides they've got a certain topic, a certain objective they want students to understand at the end of a lesson, and they give the child a quick assessment at the end, and they assess, did the students in my class learn that lesson today?
How much has your experience, and it's extensive experience in the classroom, but also kind of as a principal and then ultimately overseeing principals? Actually, the first question is your path to the superintendent's job atypical of a lot of them? It seems to me that a lot of folks who've been superintendents have spent maybe less time in the classroom and gone onto the administrative tack much earlier in their career. Is your story a little bit atypical?
I don't know. I think I don't know like the path that other people have come to superintendency, but I think the difference is, for me at least, and I think this might be sort of a change that's occurring, instructional leadership. So many times school principals were people that organized things really well and managed the program well, but they weren't necessarily instructional leaders. Same for superintendents. Superintendents, I think, might have been people who can, write up strong strategic plans and put in place certain, new initiatives and so forth, but they weren't necessarily instructional leaders. So I see myself as an instructional leader. I don't want to talk about city politics. I don't want to talk about new structure and of course when we talk about new buildings and all the rest of it, but I want to talk about inside the classroom, and being an instructional leader, I think, is what is important to me.
You answered my follow-up question, which was going to be, how do you think that shaped how you're going to approach that job and how you already have? It sounds like that experience already is shaping many of your decisions. How difficult is it for you, however, to put yourself in the shoes of the teachers in the classroom today, given that, when you started 30 some odd years ago, schools were completely different and operated completely differently, right? There's a whole new set of challenges today inside the classroom that you didn't have to deal with, most famously cell phones and the presence of technology as well. So how do you keep yourself up on all that stuff?
So there's a number of ways, right? But the best way is to be there. So to get into classrooms regularly, to have conversations with teachers regularly. So that's how to be real, right? Not to be divorced and away from the classroom, and not to make decisions without consulting teachers. So I go to schools on average, somewhere between 4 and 5 schools a week. And I try to spend time in classrooms. I don't always meet that goal. I haven't always met that goal this year. But I also talk with school principals, school leaders, and I talk with my cabinet members, one of whom in particular, Wendy Crocker, spends a lot of time in classrooms, our chief schools officer. So you've got to be real. But that is, by the way, that is absolutely where we need to focus our attention. So again, other superintendents talk about, let's change the schedule. Let's reorganize middle schools so that the 5th graders are in the elementary or some such thing. Those are structural changes. They're popular for people to tackle, but the real heart of it is in the classroom.
All right. We're chatting with Lowell School Superintendent Liam Skinner. He's joining us here on this Inside Lowell podcast, and he's joining us here in the Well Point studios. Unicare is now Well Point. New name, same commitment to Massachusetts. At Well Point, your whole health is their whole point. Cell phones. I brought the word up. And last time you were here, you were about to implement the cell phone policy. It's now been implemented, and it already had its first major test, a lockdown at the schools that really got people buzzing again against it, and some saying in favor of it. As you look at the initial, has it been a month now since it's been instituted?
Yeah, a month or so. Yeah.
Is it working as you envisioned, and is it the positive change that you envisioned when implementing the cell phone policy?
Yes, it's working, and it's the positive change we envisioned. Interestingly, you referred to the lockdown, which then sort of caused sort of further consternation among some people about cell phones, when in fact that lockdown was actually pretty solid support for the cell phone policy, believe it or not. So during the lockdown, Teddy, I was at Lowell High School. I spent my time in the school during that shelter in place, we refer to it as. And it was calm. I know the students didn't care for being in the same classroom for well over an hour, right? But what was happening in that classroom, presumably, were lessons, were related to student learning. In other words, during that shelter in place, 30 kids in a classroom were not all individually on their own cell phones and texting mom and dad and others and on social media spreading information that may or may not be true. So it was calm at Lowell High School. And so I think that's a benefit of the fact that students were not on their cell phones.
Okay, and yet there were some students who were on their cell phones, and as I understand it, some teachers instantly opened up those cabinets or the filing system that they're stored in, gave them to the students. Others didn't, which caused some consternation. You have since, however, made a policy change to address that, correct?
So one of the features I want to mention is that we don't know it all. And when we introduce a new policy, we don't know necessarily all the implications, and we might not have planned for every eventuality. When we put in place the new cell phone policy, we weren't thinking about a shelter in place. And so it's possible that different educators responded differently when that happened. There was another day prior to that when there was a fire alarm and teachers had to evacuate the building with their students. Some teachers naturally grabbed the case of cell phones and brought them with them. Some teachers didn't think to do that. That means we need to go back and rejig our policy and make it consistent and make it sensible for all those different scenarios. So in other words, we have a new policy, it's working, but we need to tweak it and we need to help it to evolve as we learn from these other situations.
And for those who aren't aware, because it struck me that, days after I was seeing discussions on social media, people were not aware that the policy has been changed. What is that new policy now in case of a lockdown or some other type of emergency?
I don't have that. Is it
automatic that the teachers have to give the phones back?
I don't have that in front of me, Teddy, so I'd be really reluctant to sort of quote to you what it says when I don't know for sure. There need to be contingencies, and I don't know what they are. In other words, under what circumstances do students get their cell phones back? Under what circumstances does the teacher leave that box of cell phones up there and get on with your lesson? I don't know exactly what we have on that.
Okay. One of the other points of contention, and we saw this a lot at a school committee meeting, where it looks like some of the committee members were kind of backing off prior support for the policy, was in a case of where a student's health is in play. Sometimes those phones, I understand, are kind of monitors for blood sugar levels,
diabetes,
etc. Sure. And there was the belief that those students were forced to turn their cell phones in. Is that accurate?
No, of course not. Of course not.
That contingency was addressed in the original cell phone policy.
So yes, but Teddy, more importantly than that, I said that it's possible that when you introduce a new policy, you haven't thought about every single contingency, and you haven't thought about, what if there's a leak, what if there's a fire drill, and so on. We hadn't necessarily thought of every contingency, but as far as a child's health goes, that one is obvious. That didn't need to be in the policy. A child who needs their cell phone because it tracks their blood sugar because they've got diabetes, absolutely that kid is going to remain with their phone. And there's never going to be a provision that doesn't provide for a child's health. Can I say, while I'm on the topic, the biggest impediment right now and the biggest problem with the cell phone policy is, I think, misinformation. So if that was said, I think it's likely that it was misinformation. The day after the shelter in place at Lowell High School, when I spent my time in the school and walking the halls and noticing how calm the school was, a student from the school was quoted in our local newspaper, front page, saying that it was, let's see what the word was, chaos, I think was a word, and mass confusion. You know, mass hysteria, I believe is the term. Mass hysteria and mass confusion were the terms used. That's just absolutely not true.
Is it possible that you didn't see at a particular time classrooms where there was some kind of disarray or whatnot, and over where the teachers should give those cell phones back?
Absolutely. Is it possible? I didn't see into every classroom. There could have been classrooms where students were arguing with teachers. There could have been upset for sure. And don't doubt that there was. But mass confusion, mass hysteria, I think that gives a different picture. Printed on the front page of our local paper, it's not, they asked the student. They didn't ask the head of school. They didn't ask teachers. They didn't ask the superintendent of schools. My understanding from my personal presence in the school that it was calm. It is possible, of course, that there was some consternation behind doors in a classroom that I didn't see, but not likely that there was mass confusion or hysteria.
Okay. And when there haven't been moments of crisis, shelter in places, or the health issues that have been going up, is the policy working? Are you noticing students less distracted, or are they finding ways around it, such as their tablets,
right,
et cetera, to do what they would have been doing on their cell phone anyway?
Right. I'd like to tell you some other ways that students can get around it, Teddy, but I'd be advertising that, you know. But it is possible, for example, that a kid comes in with a dummy cell phone and they pop that in the lockbox and they keep their real cell phone on them, right? That kind of thing is almost bound to happen. But the policy is working. It's working for this reason, my evidence so far. When you pop your head in the door of a classroom at Lowell High School, you don't see students with cell phones on their desks. You don't see students with AirPods in their ears where they're listening to a podcast or they're texting on social media in the middle of class. You don't see that. So it's working, yes.
Okay.
I think on behalf of the students, we have to remember students in today's society, some of them are literally addicted to their phones, like clinically addicted. Up to 40 or 50% of students are clinically addicted to their phones. So the students themselves need some time to adjust to the policy, meaning it feels odd to a kid sitting in a classroom and having to focus. That's not something they're accustomed to, and there's something they're becoming accustomed to, and I think the policy will be very beneficial to them.
Has there been a lot of discipline? I guess I'm asking, are kids complying, or had you had to have a lot of like taking some of the disciplinary measures, taking phones away and or going to the next steps if they're continuing to? I
don't have enough information to give you like a really confident answer on that, but I can tell you that no discipline issues have raised to my level. No sort of, it's a constant problem and it's led to a suspension or something. Nothing of that sort. No.
Okay. One last area I want to get to, and you've actually addressed it a couple of times, or at least you've said it, early literacy. AKA, or also early childhood education. We just did a 4-part series here at Inside Lowell. A gentleman named Bill Haydad submitted some data and talked about what some other states are doing and whatnot. And basically, it doesn't paint a pretty picture of Lowell public schools. And quite frankly, it also focused on Massachusetts and whatnot. But since you're the superintendent of Lowell, I want to focus on Lowell. Do we have a crisis in early childhood education, or do we have a challenge in early childhood education as you see it?
There are multiple challenges, Teddy. That phrase, it doesn't paint a pretty picture of Lowell public schools, that rankles me just a little bit, right? I want to say, you want to see a pretty picture of Lowell public schools? Walk into a classroom. You should see what our teachers are doing with the youngest of students in elementary school, and it's wonderful and it's heartening. But there is a serious problem. And there is a serious problem with early literacy. We recently, it's become popular to use reading at grade level and grade 3 as a benchmark, right? I think it's a fine benchmark. It could have been at grade 2, it could have been somewhere else. But let's say number of students reading at grade level by grade 3, critical benchmark. And I think it's genuine to say that, because we find that if students are not at grade level reading by grade 3 or 4, but they get up to middle school, it's much more difficult to tackle and to help them to get caught up. So you take that benchmark at grade 3, what are we going to do in grade 2 and grade 1 that helps the students be ready to do that extra learning that we want them to accomplish by grade 3? What do they need to look like in kindergarten? How do we get kids socialized to education in kindergarten and maybe in pre-K to prepare them for that? And I think in Lowell, we've got some serious challenges. Let me back up one step further, what are we doing for children from birth to age 3 in our community that will help them to be ready for preschool and for kindergarten when they get there? Those are concerns we need to talk about. The school department for sure, but the whole city and our community we need to think about and talk about. My children, my boys were much more at an advantage by the time they got to grade 3 because they'd been looking at books sitting in my lap and their mom's lap since maybe a month or two old, right? And then starting to finger through the pages of the books and books are something interesting, right? That's not universal. It's also there are additional other challenges. So many of our students come from families that don't speak English. So many of our students are newly arrived in the country, and so it is a very pretty picture in the classrooms at Lowell Public Schools, but our educators are having to deal with those challenges that are coming into our schools for us to address.
Right. And I'm glad there are some mitigating factors here that explain the data. But for those who haven't read the series, and I encourage everybody, InsideLowell.com, it's a 4-part series called Crisis in Early Childhood Education. And the data is presented there. But basically, 3 out of every 4 students are struggling to read at 3rd grade level. How many of those do you know are English language learners? Because you pointed out one of the main challenges that Lowell faces, that you've got kids coming to 4th and 5th grade. They've skipped 3rd grade and they're coming from foreign countries. They don't know the language, etc. How do you address that challenge? How long does it take to get that type of a student caught up to be able to go into the regular classroom, or are they put in a regular classroom from the get-go?
So one of the benefits of the fact that this issue we're talking about, early childhood literacy, kids that don't speak English, etc., right? One of the really nice things about it being at their youngest ages is that those children adapt really quickly. They learn the language really quickly. They pick up learning really quickly. So I don't have a figure. It takes such and so many months to get to such and such a stage. I can't delineate it like that for you. But I can say if we know that this is our focus, we have to put resources to that. A popular concept these days is high dosage tutoring. But if we get clear on what are the requirements we want students to come to kindergarten with, what are the skills we want them to have by the time they finish kindergarten, if we get clear about those things and put the resources in place to tackle it, the students themselves will do just fine. They're going to have the wherewithal as youngsters to learn really quickly.
Yeah, having experienced some of this with my family, Greek immigrants coming over here not speaking. The younger, there were my uncles who came here as a high school student and even younger. Those guys learned the language pretty quickly, whereas my father, who came here as a 30-year-old man, is still, it's almost impossible to catch up at that point. But in the overall picture, you focus what's happening from kindergarten to 3rd grade, and also what's happening from birth to preschool. Who's responsible? Who is helping Lowell Public Schools to get kids ready from basically infancy up towards preschool and then prepping them into kindergarten? Who are you working with on that, and how much input do Lowell Public Schools have?
Okay, so this is this conversation began, I think, with delving into what's the new superintendent I think is worthy of focus for the next several years, and so we're on that. But it doesn't we don't have it figured out today. But I can answer that question easily enough, right? So we have lots of community partners who are earnestly going at this issue with us. So Community Teamwork International is one, CTI. There are a multitude of licensed providers. I believe they're referred to as FCCs, Family Care providers that kids spend their time at for daycare and for child minding throughout the day while their parents are at work. Those are licensed people who can also help us with literacy needs for youngsters. And then, there are parents, right? There's mommy and daddy who these babies to 3 years old spend a lot of time with. And so we can do more and need to do more in our community to promote literacy to those parents as well.
I'm glad you said that, because as I was reading the series myself, and I read it with great interest every time Bill would submit one of the parts of it, and it struck me that, at some point, mom and dad or somebody, whoever is the adult in that home, bears a certain responsibility. Absolutely. For this in preparing the child. And if there's somebody's lagging behind, if you're not getting the support at home, I don't want to say it's a lost cause, but it really becomes challenging. So when you talk about the community partners, and I've talked to people who have worked at CTI previously and currently do, and when they get these children into their system, they seem to be okay. Is that kind of your experience as well, that the children that are coming from these programs with your partners that you talked about, are they caught up and ready to roll come kindergarten and whatnot?
Yes, they are. In general, they're much better prepared. The students are better socialized and have better skills and are more ready for school when we get them from those agencies. Yes. One
of the things that was presented to me, as a matter of fact, was that they handle it better than public school systems do. So don't change that. There's a lot of folks who are pushing for pre-kindergarten in the public school systems. Is that something that you think you guys are equipped to tackle?
So it happens that right now there's quite a good deal of coverage of the need for early childhood pre-K through Lowell public schools and community partners together. We're well, I think, resourced for what the community needs. We do need to increase and we need to attract more parents to bring their students to those pre-K sites. But I think Lowell Public Schools tends to offer more services to children that have more needs. So for example, children with autism, many of them are serviced in Lowell Public Schools pre-K than are serviced elsewhere, right? So that to some degree, it's slightly different populations, but also in Lowell Public Schools, we have very strong standards and we have teachers who are trained. And so I think we have a lot of faith in what we offer there. I can't say as much about other agencies whose teachers I don't oversee, okay, right? Or who may not be teachers at all.
But between the Lowell Public Schools and some of the more established partners that have a proven track record in this, there seems to be a good success rate. And how many kids would you say are kind of falling through the cracks, though, and not entering these types of programs, whether you're offering them or a partner of yours?
I don't have a number for you, but I know they're out there, Teddy.
Is it a significant enough number that's posing
yes,
a major challenge in the classroom once they get into the K through
Absolutely. 3? Absolutely. So we and again, particularly since the pandemic, I hadn't used that word till now in this podcast, but the pandemic still has an effect, and it means that students who previously would have been exposed to opportunities to learn how to work with other kids in the classroom, learn how to work with a teacher, maybe haven't. So our kindergarten and preschool teachers are really struggling with that still. And it's improving, but very slowly. The students, the babies from baby age up to age 3 who are not, we're not having access to, we don't have programs for necessarily, those children can sometimes be with parents who weren't read to themselves as babies and young kids. They're not socialized to do that. And also they may have other needs and other concerns that are primary for them, like putting food on the table, finding a job, right? So that's where the need is greatest.
All right. I'm going to end it right there because we could probably go on forever. But since you promised you're going to come back more often, we got lots to talk about. And I'm sure in the ensuing month or so between appearances, you'll probably make some news that we can talk about anyway.
Well, it'll all be positive news, hopefully, Teddy. Yes. Thank you. Right. Thank you for the opportunity. Great to see you again.
Thank you for joining us, and thank all of you for joining us as well. Our podcast with Lowell School Superintendent Liam Skinner. Till next time, stay safe, everybody.